Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook video for today, Wednesday, June 25th, 2025. Let's start off by taking a look at the world of tropics today, because there are a few things going on across the globe. First of all, obviously, we have the remnants of Andrea, which formed surprisingly, gave us a nice little scare yesterday. Well, not really a scare because it did not impact anybody. It was only a small, weak, little low pressure spin up in the central Atlantic, and it is harmlessly out to sea now and pretty much dead. But we do have the remnants that are at least still on this web page. So that's all we have in the Atlantic. In the Eastern Pacific, we have Invest 95E, and I'll show you that on the National Hurricane Center Tropical Weather Bulletin in a moment. But this is very likely to develop over the next week and become our next named storm in the Eastern Pacific. And there's also some stuff happening in the Western Pacific too. You don't hear about the Western Pacific often, mainly because it's not really our area of interest, or at least the areas that I really cover. But from time to time, we like to take a look at the West Pac. And there's a few things there. There's a tropical depression near Japan. This was once tropical storm, now tropical depression, Sephat, I think that's the name. And then we have another tropical depression here in the South China Sea. And I'll show you actually towards the end of the video, there looks like there might be another development in the West Pac that this time could actually be a pretty significant typhoon as we head into the next week there, that we could maybe monitor since it will be pretty significant. I'll show you that though towards the end of the video later on. But really quickly, here's a look at the latest National Hurricane Center Tropical Weather Bulletin. Again, Andrea is gone. It was only a quick system that formed yesterday, didn't impact anybody. And for at least the foreseeable future, nothing expected to develop and become anything significant over the next 7 days. In the Eastern Pacific, I just showed you we have Invest 95E, which the National Hurricane Center gives a 40% chance of development in the next 48 hours. And a total of 80% chance in the next 7 days in which this might potentially develop and become our next named storm in the Eastern Pacific, which would be Flossie. And if it forms before July, it will be, and I've said this before, but it will be the earliest sixth named storm on record in the Eastern Pacific. Just a testament to how active the Eastern Pacific has been this month. But it looks like they're going to squeeze out one more system before the month is over. And so let's take a look at the satellite imagery right now and see how things are shaping up in the Eastern Pacific. You can see here Invest 95E, there's a little bit of turning on the satellite. Nothing completely organized yet, but it'll probably continue to organize over the next several days. It might get close to the coast of Mexico. Not seeing the models showing a direct hit on Mexico, or although most of them don't, but this might get close to the coast of Mexico before it eventually moves on off to the west-northwest as the week progresses next week. And this will probably be a moderate system, won't be anything strong. Definitely won't have to worry about this being another Eric. I mean, God knows that Mexico doesn't need another strong storm right now. Especially not only just Eric, but the last several years of strong storms that have been impacting a relatively similar area of central Mexico as well. So hopefully 95E won't make a direct impact to Mexico, and judging by the models, it probably will not. Maybe there will be some impacts along the coastline with high surf, maybe some gusty winds and some outer bands, but nothing significant out of 95E. And then the rest of the Pacific, we have some convective activity. And then obviously, especially out towards the west-northwest here in the Pacific, you can see lots of dry air, very indicative of the more drier, stable conditions in the west-northwestern portions of the Eastern Pacific, which is probably what will affect 95E over the next several days once it develops. And I've been talking about the fact that, there's only a very limited window, but somehow it's really come together over the last several weeks here in the Eastern Pacific of things being able to develop very close to the Mexican coastline in the southeastern Pacific, despite the fact that we have a very stable, unfavorable pattern with sea surface temperatures, especially towards the west-northwestern portion of the Pacific, being much below normal, in which you would think that the pattern in the Pacific would not be very favorable, but yet we've somehow gotten a record active Eastern Pacific season, and it looks like that will continue over the next several days as we close out the month of June. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, obviously, nothing really occurring. You can see really briefly at the top portion of the screen, right where my mouse is. I think that is the remnants of Andrea, the remnant spin. And let's actually really quickly take a look at the 850 millibar vorticity. And yeah, look at that. You can see the remnant spin of Andrea. It has still a pretty potent low-level center, despite the fact that there's no convection, and there hasn't been any convection since pretty much yesterday afternoon. So quite impressive, as far north as it is, that it still has a pretty potent low-level center the way it does, which is why I was very able to quickly spin up earlier this week and somehow snag a name yesterday. And obviously this is going to stay out to sea and not bring any major impacts to anybody. While meanwhile, taking a look at the tropics, at least in the MDR and through the Caribbean, there's nothing on the vorticity that is consolidating just yet. Although you can see in the Eastern Pacific here with 95E, vorticity and spin in the atmosphere is starting to consolidate. We do have quite an aggressive low-level center here that is trying to take shape. Still a little bit elongated right now, and you can especially see that on the satellite loop. Let's really quickly go back here. It is elongated. It's probably going to take a few more days before it fully consolidates and becomes a tropical system, but it probably is on its way to doing so. But meanwhile, across the rest of the Atlantic, just really quickly flipping back here to the satellite, obviously nothing else happening, and you can definitely clearly see why. Strong wind shear in the upper levels, and especially through the eastern and central parts of the MDR. Lots of thick Saharan air, strong trade winds pushing lots of Saharan air off the continent of Africa into the MDR. All things that we typically see in the early season, and things as to why typically the early season is not active, and we typically don't watch the Eastern Atlantic anyways for development. So obviously, because of that, things are probably for the foreseeable future remain quiet in the Atlantic. And I'll show you that here on the GFS. If we take it out towards the next week, nothing much happens, although I will say I did see it this morning on the earlier run of the GFS, and seems like it is still here on the 12Z GFS. Pretty interesting, potent tropical wave that the GFS does seem to have a little bit. You can see here, it's very small, but a little bit of vorticity that does try to consolidate on the GFS here around 4 to 5 days as it approaches the Lesser Antilles Islands, and the Southern Islands probably ends up impacting Trinidad and Tobago, but obviously does not become anything potent. Definitely not like the signature we have here in the Eastern Pacific, which is associated with 95E, and that is definitely going to develop within the next 5 days. And then, as you can see, it moves on off to the west-northwest. Stays somewhat close to the Mexican coastline, but not looking at a direct impact for now, so obviously that is good. But very interesting thing on the GFS, potent tropical wave. And sometimes, in the early season, and we've especially had that quite a bit over the last several years, where for some reason we've been getting these quick spin-ups in the MDR, except for last year, which it ended up being a Category 5 major hurricane on July 1st with Beryl, and that's definitely not going to happen here. But the bottom line is I'm saying that the last several years has had some development in the MDR in late June, and that is a pretty potent-looking tropical wave on the GFS, although it obviously doesn't really amount to much. In fact, it kind of fizzles out as it heads towards the islands. So that's probably all that it will be, nothing more. just a potent tropical wave that will have a few hours where it maybe looks somewhat decent. And probably nothing else beyond that within the next 7 days. Things remaining nice and quiet in the Atlantic. Maybe a little bit of vorticity here in the subtropics. Maybe we have something else like Andrea that tries to spin up. I don't know. But beyond that, in terms of any potent systems developing, at least per the GFS, nothing happening over the next week. So let's really quickly flip now to the Western Pacific, because I did mention to you that there is quite a bit of activity that is going to happen there. And you can see here, definitely so far a lot of activity that's happened. That small piece of vorticity here, that's our depression that I showed you on the the University of Wisconsin website. There's a depression near Japan. There's also a depression in the South China Sea, and you can see that on the GFS model here. And then those fizzle out, so we won't have to worry about that. But especially as we head towards the next week, you can see that there is a pretty potent system that develops here on the GFS. And also on the Euro, quite a bit of models show we might get a pretty potent system to develop, and it might become a pretty major typhoon in the Pacific. And obviously we'll have to watch and see, does it impact Japan or does it stay out to sea? But yeah, we have a pretty significant system that develops here on the Pacific. And even look on the GFS, there's something else that develops here in the South China Sea. And the best way to explain as to why all of this is happening, well, you can really just take a look at the velocity potential chart, aka where the rising motion is in the atmosphere, and notice where all the rising motion is right now in the entire globe is in the Western Pacific, where all these greens and blues are here. It all corresponds to the general Western Pacific area of influence, meaning that there is rising motion. The atmosphere is generally favorable for thunderstorms and for tropical activity to occur in the Pacific right now. And we also have, looks like a Kelvin wave that is moving through there, and also will move into the Eastern Pacific as we close out the month of June and head into July, which obviously is going to help anything that does try to develop in the Eastern Pacific. And then obviously you could see on the flip side in the Atlantic a lot of these oranges and reds, and that represents sinking motion in the atmosphere, and that's very prevalent over the Atlantic right now, which is why obviously there is not much of anything that's really going to develop, at least over the next several days, in the tropical Atlantic. So nice how you can see how rising motion and how the pattern sets up over the world, and how that translates to current things happening right now, favorable, unfavorable in the Atlantic, and favorable in the Pacific, especially with the activity that we're going to get. And just to really quickly write that home, here are the European ensembles for the next 10 days. And yeah, look at the activity that appears here on the ensembles of the European. In fact, quite a few of them are pretty potent. In fact, I see one here, 940s, 930s, quite a few are showing a pretty potent typhoon. So it looks like the West Pacific and the Pacific in general is where all of the activity is for now. On the flip side, the Atlantic is going to remain quiet. Andrea was just a small little blimp, a quick spin up that gave us our, first brief storm. But for at least the next week or so, no activity or any significant activity expected in the Atlantic. Obviously, we'll see if anything else that is small and brief tries to spin up. But in terms of any major storms, nothing in the Atlantic. And of course, all of the activity to watch in the Pacific right now. But we'll obviously see over the next several weeks if that pattern changes, and things slowly and eventually become more favorable for the Atlantic, especially as we head into the peak. We'll watch and see, and monitor how the pattern changes and see how everything evolves. With that being said, I'm going to end it off for today's video. And if you really did enjoy today's video, as I always say every single day, please like, comment, and subscribe, especially if you are interested in daily tropical weather videos, which I do. Especially make sure to subscribe. and turn on the notification bell so you can get videos the moment I upload them, right down to the second. And also, if you know anybody else that's interested in tropical weather videos and this kind of information, make sure to share this video with them as well. And we can kind of keep the community growing here too, which is also something else that I hope that we could do. With that being said, enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. I will see you back here tomorrow.